It's 2018, and we'll be seeing yet another Robin Hood film being made. We've seen quite a few of these, the most recent film version being the Russell Crowe prequel sort of film. This one is a modern reinterpretation with a medieval punk twist. The 2018 Robin Hood film is produced by Lionsgate Studios, the same people behind the Kingsman Secret Service series, and also starring Taron Egerton, who is the protagonist, Eggsy, from the Kingsman films. The premise of the film is that Robin Hood is a veteran of the Crusades. He returns to Nottingham. He encounters Little John, who in this version of the story is an Arabic warrior played by Jamie Foxx, and he goes on his own personal crusade. While the 2018 film takes a huge step away from the traditional views of Robin Hood and historical accuracy, the film does prominently feature archery, which is why we're here in this video. So whether or not you intend to watch the movie or you have seen the movie, there will be a lot of buzz around the archery demonstrated in the film, how realistic it is or isn't, and lots more. So the purpose of this video is to talk through the historical background and perspectives of Robin Hood, as well as the techniques and differing opinions on what we might see in the movie. Now, many of you will be familiar with previous Robin Hood TV series and films. For example, The Adventures of Robin Hood, starring Errol Flynn, and notably including the exploits and skills of Howard Hill, one of the best traditional longbow shooters ever. You might be familiar with more recent incarnations, including Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. You might know the more recent Russell Crowe movie, Robin Hood, which is the prequel to the Robin Hood legend, or even the comedy Robin Hood Men in Tights. The 2018 film is quite different from these previous incarnations, though it does follow patterns from other films. Basically, we have the protagonist warrior who discovers that his style isn't good enough, so he has to learn an exotic oriental style from some foreign master, and then he has to save his home, family, dog, and or reputation. This is, in effect, the Karate Kid with bows. Part of the appeal of this kind of trope and storytelling is that it exposes the audience to something new and bizarre. It uses something external, something outside, to unbalance the establishment and raise the hero up to conquer their biggest demons and the big bad guy. And this is what we see in this particular Robin Hood. Robin's adventures and campaigns in the Holy Land expose him to a superior archery from the Saracens, which he too must now learn from Jamie Foxx, in order to become a real warrior. Anyone who has an interest in archery, especially the history of archery, probably knows about the great feats of the English bowmen who used the longbow to great effect against the French during the 100 Years' War. The English longbow was dominant between the 13th and 15th centuries and had great successes in battles like Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt. However, the Robin Hood legends typically place him during the reign of Richard the Lionhearted and the Third Crusade, which took place from 1189. This would have been around the time when bows were just beginning to be widely adopted by the English army. The Assize of Arms in 1187 established the requirement of owning weapons and armour and bows by the lower classes. The mandatory practice of archery by law was only passed in the Assize of Arms in 1252. The first recorded encounter with the Welsh longbow, which we believe the English adopted the bow from, was in 1188. An English knight was shot by a Welsh bow, and the arrow passed through his chainmail, his clothing, his thigh, and the arrow passed into the horse's saddle, proving the great power and penetration of these bows. What this means is that the bows and archers that were used during the Crusades were not the famed English longbowmen that we are probably more familiar with. The prominence of the English longbow would not happen for another 100 years. Instead, the Crusader armies, which consisted of men from all around Europe, were known to have used bows and crossbows, the latter being particularly effective against Saracen armor, while Saracen bows were less effective against Crusader armor. On that note, the Saracens were known to have used the composite bow for centuries and predominantly used the thumb draw technique, very similar to other Eastern or Asiatic styles, including Mongolian and Turkish. The Saracens were known to have used bows and archery as a foot-based weapon and used them from mounts, including camels and horses. So where does this position the hypothetical Robin Hood in this real timeline? Now, he most definitely would have used a longbow, though perhaps not the super heavy war bows, which the English were famous for later on. It might not have been a very high draw weight or very powerful bow. It might have been sufficient for hunting or poaching and for banditry. Hypothetically, could a Crusader Robin Hood have brought back a Saracen bow? It's plausible. Could he have developed the skill to have used a Saracen bow with Saracen techniques? Highly unlikely. Lars Andersen needs no introduction. As the single most viewed archer on YouTube, his skills are a modern legend. I've actually known about Lars' involvement with the film for months, and I've been hoping that he would do some kind of reveal on his site before I did my commentary, and thankfully he's just released a video doing some behind the scenes commentary on the development of archery in the film, which I highly recommend you watch. It's actually the most insightful and detailed description of Lars' techniques and training methods, and it does showcase the actors, specifically Taron and Egerton, and their skill and development using the dynamic archery which Lars is known for. In this video, Lars raises things such as the method of drawing the bow, which in this case is derived from the Persian draw. He also talks about passages quoted from Saracen archery as well as visual sources. What we therefore see in the film is a transition from a somewhat more traditional English style of archery to a more exotic Eastern style of archery, with the appropriate experts to provide training and commentary. For those watching this Robin Hood movie, you may have certain perceptions about archery going into the movie and certain perceptions coming out of the movie. There's already a popular notion of the effectiveness of archery, especially the way Lars Andersen does it, and it spawned quite a few debunking videos. Some people will take issue with the way archery is depicted in this Robin Hood film. Others will use it to validate their ideas of combat archery. One thing that should be made very clear is that the scenarios presented in the film were created and adapted to suit the style of archery they wanted to show. The scenarios were not derived from real situations in which the bow was used. In the behind-the-scenes featurette we mentioned earlier, the director explicitly said that he wanted to create a modern guerrilla-style urban warfare setting in which the shorter Saracen bow could be used with more ease and maneuverability and style and skill than what a longer traditional English bow could be capable of. When we witness the scenes of Robin Hood fighting the Crusades, what we see is an homage to modern warfare, with intense house-to-house fighting, automatic arrow launches, and explosions left and right. This is an image of warfare that is around 1,000 years from reality. And honestly, I do like the creativity in adapting a medieval setting or a modern setting and transposing it into a medieval period of technology. However, this is not a historically accurate depiction of warfare for the following reasons. Most major conflicts during the Middle Ages were either done in open pitched field battles or in sieges. Now, in open warfare or open battles, archers were normally deployed in skirmishing roles or harassment roles, where they would open fire or shoot onto enemy troops. Now, depending on the particular time, place, and region, the exact method of deployment differed. In most cases, the armies would deploy the archers in the front as the openers of the battle, and they would withdraw later right and support the troops if necessary. The English during the 100 Years' War were more well known for deploying the archers in defensive positions behind stakes on the wings of their main body of troops, whereas other cultures, including the Eastern style archers, were more well known for the use of mounted cavalry archers, in which case they would be more mobile and often support the main body in flanking maneuvers. In siege warfare, archers were of course used to shoot at the defenders on the walls, and on the defense, the archers would be deployed on the walls and towers and shoot down on the besieging army. Here's where many people visualize the battle incorrectly. When the battle reaches the streets, I think some people have the image of archers becoming close quarters speed shooting combatants. But this is unlikely for the following reasons. Battles were rarely fought inside the city or castle. Look, cities are awful places to organize an army, as anyone who's played Total War knows. It's cramped, it's chaotic, and it's often a last resort. It's practically impossible to organize your army of tens of thousands in an orderly manner to fight in city streets. An example of this is the sack of Rome by the Senones under King Brennus. And this is where the Gallic tribes invaded Rome, and they fought against the armies of Marcus Furius Camillus. The Romans and the Gauls fought in the streets of Rome for a day, where it was chaotic and inconclusive, and they left the city and fought on the field the following day. In a siege, what would normally happen is that the defenders, if the walls were breached, would abandon the outer defenses and moved into an inner set of defenses, such as an inner set of walls or an improvised fortification or the keep or whatever defenses were available. This is again because the defenders had the advantage in prepared positions. It was very unlikely that they would have to fight foot by foot, house by house. If there was any actual fighting in the streets, it was probably incidental and not intended as a battle plan. Now, when we're talking about breaches of enemy defenses, the first troops to enter this battle, the first into the breach, were footmen, infantry, the most well-armored soldiers, using shields and swords and polearms and axes and hammers. And these are the ones, the shock troops, who would be the first to break through the enemy defenses and fight their way through enemy lines. So if there was any fighting in the streets, it's most likely going to be these soldiers, the infantry, the foot soldiers who'll be doing the fighting, not lightly armored archers. After all, why would you send your support missile troops into the breach as frontline fighters? And to be realistic, if the soldiers are already in the city streets, the battle's probably over, and all they're doing is looting and pillaging. So with that in mind, Robin Hood in the 2018 film fights much more like a modern infantryman than a medieval archer. This is a world where bows and crossbows are the primary weapon, not swords or other melee weapons. Effectively, bows replace guns. Consider the situations we see Robin Hood fighting using his techniques. It's very clear that he is following the rule of cool, doing things in the most impressive, flashy way, despite the fact that there were probably much simpler ways of doing things. The distances are so close that any sane person would use a melee weapon, not a ranged weapon. That is, if they had melee weapons. We see Robin fighting through alleys and corridors with multiple arrows in his hand, but of course, he has exactly 3 arrows to shoot at 3 enemies. And we see in the trailers a particular sequence where Robin Hood jumps out, does a spinning double shot, and drops 2 heavily armored enemies with 1 shot each. And this again plays with a different trope of armor being paper, because in real life, even a 150-pound warbow shot at point blank range, at close distance, can't penetrate a steel breastplate. And yet we see a trick shot with a light bow at half draw, easily dropping the most heavily armored guards we can see. Meanwhile, it seems that nobody knows how to hit an unarmored, predictably jumping person a few feet away. Look, there's a reason why we don't see modern soldiers doing flips and combat rolls in real combat. Basically, this is excellent choreography. Good choreography is when the director or the choreographer makes creative use in adapting the setting, the environment, and the tools to work well together, which is what we see in these sequences. I predict in the future many people will specifically search for these action scenes from Robin Hood, just as we'd like to see fight scenes from other movies. The things we see in Robin Hood are plausible. They can be done. And in fact, Lars Andersen proves that these techniques have been done, can be done. So they're plausible, in some cases even realistic. However, they are not historically accurate, and that is specifically stated by the director. Remember, they have crafted and fabricated these action scenes to work with the tools they have to showcase the style and flair and flavor they want to show in this Robin Hood film. This is not how archers would have fought in real history. And it's important to raise this because our perception and imagery of historical combat is often influenced by film. And you might think of it like the Braveheart effect, where despite what we know about medieval history, people will associate Scottish people and Braveheart with blue face paint and kilts. And there is a very high chance that this Robin Hood film, despite its obvious intent to have a modern fictional fantasy twist to the Robin Hood legend, may influence how many people see medieval combat. Regardless of the realism, many people are probably going to go, wow, where can I learn to shoot like that? Unfortunately, you're probably not going to. If you visit your local archery club, you're most likely going to come across the most common style of archery, which is derived from Western archery. And that can be either modern target archery or traditional archery. And don't think of this as a negative thing. Many people who try archery because of film, such as The Hunger Games or Arrow or Brave, do actually find that this kind of archery is quite fulfilling. Once you stand on the line and start trying to hit the target, you often forget about the whole dynamic flips and rolls and cool trick shooting. Now, some people are motivated by the more awesome dynamic shooting, but you might be surprised at how much satisfaction you get from just doing it right. And believe me, doing it right is a lot harder than it looks. If you are interested in pursuing an Eastern or Asiatic style of archery, unfortunately these groups or schools or clubs are far less common. You may be able to find a group or a club that you can easily access nearby, in which case you are very lucky. If there is none, and again, it depends on your region, it might be easy or very difficult, if not impossible, to find such a club. Then there's not a whole lot you can do to learn from other people directly, which is the easiest way to learn. If you are self-starting, you may have to look up manuscripts or books that specialize in the style of archery that you want to do, including Saracen archery or Manchu archery or Korean archery, and so on. If you're looking for online videos or tutorials, which is how many of us get started with archery now, unfortunately, there's not much out there which specifically teaches the speed shooting or trick shooting that we see Lars do. Lars has his own channel, of course, which is how many people know him, but there's not much in terms of tutorials. He tends to keep these techniques to himself. In terms of any reference material for Eastern style archery, I do highly recommend Armin Hirmer from Malta Archery. I'll link to his channel here in the description. He probably has the most widespread bank of knowledge on YouTube at this moment. Honestly, if you do want to shoot like Lars Andersen, you probably have to figure it out by yourself, just like he did. Again, there are sources which will give you a background. It might show you some techniques, some visual references, but most of it is experimenting, getting hands-on with a bow. And look, there's no reason why nobody else can shoot like Lars if you're willing to put the time into practicing and developing your technique. And once you've figured out what works, the rest is practice, practice, practice. If you do want to replicate the shooting we see in Robin Hood and Lars Andersen, perhaps don't think of it as a practical skill or replicating historical archery. Archery today is not a practical skill. Most people do it as an optional pursuit, either as a sport or a hobby. Some people hunt, but the techniques aren't really applicable to hunting. So I feel that when people do it for like survival reasons or practical reasons, it isn't the best reason to do archery or to do this particular kind of archery. I find that the people who are probably going to be the happiest do it as a personal challenge or curiosity, or to maximize or perfect your own technique. And the pursuit of that goal or the progress towards that is the fulfilling part. The journey is what fulfills you, as we all say with anything. So yeah, don't think of it as like you have to be this kind of archer to be a real archer. It's a style which is very impressive if you want to do this sort of thing. So if you can't learn this kind of archery or access this kind of archery, don't feel like you're missing out on the archery experience. There are still many other ways that you can enjoy archery. Likewise, don't be dismissive about other ways you yourself can enjoy archery or how others enjoy archery. And remember, safety first. In the lead up to the theatrical release of Robin Hood on November 21st, 2018, a lot of people are getting worked up about the historical inaccuracies in the film. My advice is to take a step back, see for what it is. It is not meant to be a traditional historical portrayal of Robin Hood. It is a modern twist, and that's what is specifically stated by the director. So if this upsets you, it's not that kind of movie. Nor is it a historically accurate archery film. And while many of the techniques are very impressive, it is heavily based on exhibition stunt shooting, not necessarily realistic combat archery. It is impressive because the actors do put in the effort to learn to manipulate the bow in a more confident way, which reduces the reliance on CGI. And I think this actually adds a very good edge to the film. in many ways, it's kind of like how we can appreciate combat scenes in movies like John Wick, especially Keanu Reeves, who is actually a very good shooter himself. So when he fights in these action sequences, the techniques flow and have a certain efficiency and brutality. At the same time, the movie often swings towards the gun kata equilibrium kind of thing, where people just conveniently stand in the right spots for you to shoot at. So I think it kind of balances out between gritty, plausible, realistic situations and just plain choreography. So if you keep that in mind, I think this is a movie which has some potentially memorable sequences, but don't get hung up on how realistic it is. And I think if you do that, you'll probably enjoy the movie a lot more. In a way, I hope you found this interesting and insightful. I think many people would be interested in the historical background, especially archery used in movies like this. It's not common to see archery portrayed specifically as the main feature of a film, and many people get into archery because of movies, including Hunger Games and Brave. So if you're the kind of person who thinks this is awesome, amazing, that's really good. It's nice to enjoy a movie for what it is. But like I said, don't be too hung up on the historical accuracy and background. It's just there as an inspiration, and if you take it easy, then you might enjoy the movie a lot more. Anyway, this is NUSensei. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.